Magneto check. Cut the throttle.
She's running rich.
Keep her turning over.
We cannot halt the assembly line over this. The structural reports confirm the fuselage is sound, Captain. We have to maintain the production schedule.
Look at the stress fracture on the landing gear strut.
That's not good. We'll have to ground her until we get a replacement.
General, this sector is heavily fortified. Our current trajectory puts the squadron at risk.
January 17th, 1941. The morning fog still clings to the Puget Sound, shrouding Seattle in gray silence. Inside Boeing's sprawling plant, the air hums with industry. The scent of hot steel mingles with oil and sawdust. Engineers lean over drafting tables, pencils scratching against paper, tracing lines that could decide the fate of a nation. A prototype bomber sits on the runway outside, its massive wings spanning wider than any plane the U.S. Army Air Corps has ever fielded. Mechanics climb along its fuselage, checking engines that have yet to prove themselves in combat. Test pilots pace nervously, fingers drumming against their leather jackets, knowing every liftoff is a step into the unknown. Across the hall, executives and military inspectors confer quietly, tension threading every word. America, still on the edge of war, has no strategic bomber capable of crossing oceans or striking the heart of an enemy nation. Yet here, in this factory of ambition, a new machine is being forged, one that will carry the hopes, fears, and courage of thousands into the skies above Europe. Above it all, the engines roar to life, a sound both terrifying and beautiful. The B-17 is ready to fly. The question now looms: could this flying fortress change the course of a coming war? By 1939, the world had already plunged into a conflict that would redefine warfare. Europe was ablaze. Germany's blitzkrieg tore through Poland with unprecedented speed, and by June 1940, France had fallen. Across the Atlantic, the United States watched, still officially neutral, yet acutely aware of the military imbalance between itself and the warring nations. The U.S. Army Air Corps, America's fledgling air arm, faced a daunting reality. Its bombers were slow, lightly armed, and incapable of reaching strategic targets far from the homeland. Planes like the Douglas B-18 BOLO and Martin B-10, once considered modern, were already obsolete in the face of Luftwaffe tactics. Range was limited, payload small, and defensive armament insufficient. Across the Atlantic, British bombers were being tested in the skies over Germany, while German aircraft like the Heinkel He-111 and Dornier Do-17 carried out raids with speed and precision. Military leaders recognized that air power would determine the next war's outcome. General Henry Hap Arnold, chief of the Army Air Corps, understood the stakes. He knew the U.S. needed a bomber that could travel hundreds of miles over hostile territory, deliver devastating payloads, and return. It would require range, speed, durability, and defensive firepower, qualities absent in the current fleet. Meanwhile, Boeing, already an established aircraft manufacturer, had been experimenting with new designs. The Model 299, a prototype flown in the mid-1930s, had introduced revolutionary concepts for engines, heavy defensive armament and a high-altitude operational ceiling. Though the prototype crashed during a demonstration due to a forgotten control lock, it had revealed the future of strategic bombing. Boeing engineers continued refining these ideas, blending technical ingenuity with lessons drawn from European conflicts. In Washington, D.C., military procurement was a delicate dance. Budgets were constrained by isolationist sentiment, and Congress hesitated to fund projects that seemed experimental or excessive. The Army Air Corps submitted requests for a heavy bomber capable of transcontinental missions, but each proposal met scrutiny. The industrial base, while competent, had never produced an aircraft of this scale. Delays in materials, labor shortages, and the sheer complexity of building a multi-engine bomber threatened to stall progress. Across Boeing's Seattle plant, teams of engineers, draftsmen, and mechanics worked around the clock. Daylight hours were consumed in the drafting rooms, where precise calculations determined lift, fuselage strength, and engine placement. Nights were spent testing engines and assembling prototypes, each component a fragile promise of what the future could hold. The tension was palpable. Failure was not an option, yet success was far from guaranteed. The global context pressed relentlessly. Germany's Luftwaffe was dominating the skies over Europe. Britain relied on desperate night raids and early radar systems to defend against the onslaught. The Japanese threat in the Pacific loomed as well, with American planners realizing that any future war might stretch across both oceans. The U.S. needed a bomber that could bridge these theaters, one capable of delivering not just bombs but strategic influence. By late 1940, the Army Air Corps formalized its requirements. They demanded a bomber with a maximum speed exceeding 300 miles per hour, a range of 2,000 miles fully loaded, defensive firepower covering all approach angles, a service ceiling high enough to avoid most enemy fighters, and a payload sufficient to carry hundreds of kilograms of bombs. Boeing embraced the challenge. Engineers drew inspiration from lessons learned abroad while pushing American aviation to new limits. Test pilots risked every flight, pushing the aircraft to stall speeds, full payload, and extreme altitudes. With each successful flight, confidence grew, but so did scrutiny from military inspectors and skeptics. Every delay, every mechanical failure, was weighed against the growing urgency of global events. As the first prototypes neared completion in early 1941, the B-17 was no longer merely a plane. It was a symbol. It embodied the hope that America could overcome industrial and technological limitations to create an aircraft that could dominate the skies. It was a bold answer to a question the nation had been asking for years. How would America defend itself and project power if war finally came to its doorstep? The stage was set. Boeing had a design. The Army Air Corps had its demands. And the world, still engulfed in chaos, was about to witness the birth of a bomber that would define strategic air warfare. By early 1941, the urgency for a modern American bomber had reached a crescendo. Europe burned. Britain struggled to defend against relentless Luftwaffe raids, and Japan's expansion in Asia threatened American interests across the Pacific. The United States remained officially neutral, yet military planners understood that neutrality was fragile. The Army Air Corps' leadership knew that without an advanced heavy bomber, America would enter any future conflict at a severe disadvantage. Boeing faced immense pressure. The company had to refine the Model 299 into a production-ready bomber, balancing innovation with reliability. Engineers focused on the four-engine configuration, which offered unprecedented range and payload. They redesigned the airframe to carry a bomb load exceeding 4,000 pounds, while incorporating defensive gun positions that would cover nearly every angle of attack. Each gun turret, each panel of armor, was painstakingly calculated to optimize protection without compromising speed or maneuverability. Testing proved arduous. Flight crews reported mechanical quirks, engines overheating under sustained load, hydraulic lines failing, and control surfaces reacting unpredictably at high altitudes. Each problem required iterative solutions. Boeing's engineers worked feverishly, often staying overnight to adjust, redesign, or recalibrate components. The human element, the pilots, mechanics, and engineers, became as crucial to success as the metal and rivets forming the aircraft's frame. Meanwhile, Army Air Corps officials scrutinized every prototype flight. They sought assurance that the B-17 could survive in combat conditions, carry its full payload over long distances, and withstand enemy attacks. Test missions involved not only performance metrics, but also simulated combat drills. Crews practiced defensive formations, high-altitude navigation, and long-range bombing runs over uninhabited regions of the Pacific Northwest. Each successful trial built confidence. Each failure underscored the risks of relying on unproven technology in a global war. Procurement was another obstacle. Isolationist sentiment in Congress slowed funding, and approval for large-scale production required careful negotiation. The Air Corps had to justify the B-17's cost and complexity, while Boeing had to demonstrate that American industry could meet the demand. Production lines had to be retooled, workers trained, and supply chains expanded. Steel, aluminum, and engines were not limitless. Every resource was meticulously allocated, ensuring that the bomber could be built efficiently without compromising quality. By mid-1941, the B-17 had matured into a symbol of American ingenuity and determination. The bomber combined speed, range, payload, and defensive firepower in a way that no previous U.S. aircraft had. Its design reflected lessons learned from observing Europe's air campaigns. High-altitude operations to evade fighters, heavy armament to survive attacks, and structural strength to endure flak and turbulence. Yet the true test remained ahead. The B-17 would soon leave the factory floor and take the skies filled with uncertainty. Pilots and crews would push it to its limits, encountering the harsh realities of weather, mechanical failure, and enemy engagement. Each flight would not only prove the aircraft's capabilities, but also shape the doctrine of strategic bombing that the United States would rely upon throughout the war. In these early months, the groundwork was being laid. Boeing's engineers, the Army Air Corps, and the growing workforce in Seattle and across America were united by a common purpose: to create a bomber capable of changing the trajectory of a global conflict. The B-17 was no longer an experiment. It was a promise that American industry, technology, and courage could converge to meet the demands of a world at war. With this foundation in place, the story of the B-17 unfolds through multiple perspectives. The people who built it, the strategies it enabled, the leaders who guided its creation, and the enemies it would ultimately face. Each angle reveals not just a machine, but a chapter in the making of modern air warfare. Inside the Boeing factory, every rivet, every bolt was touched by human hands. Engineers bent over drafting tables, translating abstract calculations into tangible forms. Mechanics crawled beneath fuselages, adjusting engines and testing hydraulic systems. Test pilots strapped into cockpits, knowing that failure could be fatal. Their courage was as essential as the steel and aluminum around them. Edward Curtis, one of Boeing's lead engineers, recalled the relentless pace of production. "We didn't just build airplanes. We built confidence in ourselves and in what America could do." Pilots faced uncertainty with each flight. They pushed the B-17 to altitudes over 25,000 feet, navigating through turbulent winds and freezing temperatures. Cabin temperatures plummeted, oxygen systems strained, and instruments often froze mid-flight. Yet the crews persisted. Their dedication transformed a collection of metal and rivets into a fighting machine capable of confronting the world's most dangerous skies. Workers in the factories also bore the weight of urgency. Women, often new to industrial work, learned riveting, assembly, and inspection in record time. Labor shortages meant shifts stretched from dawn until midnight, and exhaustion became a constant companion. Every successfully installed engine, every completed fuselage represented a personal contribution to a war that America had yet to enter but was already preparing to face. The B-17 represented a leap in aviation technology. Unlike its predecessors, it relied on 4 powerful radial engines, each providing nearly 1,200 horsepower. This allowed it to carry heavy payloads over distances previously impossible for American bombers. Engineers experimented with wing design, fuselage strength, and weight distribution to achieve a delicate balance. Enough armor to survive enemy fire, without sacrificing speed or maneuverability. Defensive armament was revolutionary. The B-17 featured multiple gun positions: nose, tail, dorsal, ventral, and waist. Crews could lay down overlapping fields of fire, creating a lethal envelope around the aircraft. Innovations such as the powered turret and improved bomb sight enhanced both survivability and accuracy. These systems were tested rigorously under simulated combat conditions, ensuring that the plane could not only fly long distances, but also return intact from heavily defended enemy territory. High-altitude capability was another breakthrough. Flying above 25,000 feet meant avoiding the majority of enemy fighters and anti-aircraft fire. But it also introduced new challenges. Pressurization systems were minimal, oxygen scarcity threatened crew endurance, and navigation became exponentially more complex. Every technological solution, from engine performance to defensive layout, was a direct response to the harsh realities of aerial warfare. From a tactical perspective, the B-17 transformed the Army Air Corps' approach to strategic bombing. Previous U.S. bombers had been limited to short-range missions, often relying on speed and maneuverability rather than firepower and endurance. The B-17's long range and payload allowed planners to conceive operations that could strike deep into enemy territory, targeting industrial hubs, rail networks, and military installations. Formation flying became a cornerstone of strategy. Single B-17s were vulnerable, but tightly coordinated groups, combat boxes, could maximize overlapping fields of defensive fire while maintaining bombing accuracy. Pilots trained endlessly to maintain position, altitude, and timing under adverse conditions. The doctrine emphasized precision over saturation, reflecting both technological capability and a strategic vision of leaders like General Arnold. Tactics also adapted to enemy threats. Reconnaissance missions informed route planning, avoiding heavily fortified areas whenever possible. Intelligence briefings incorporated Luftwaffe deployment patterns, weather conditions, and terrain analysis. The B-17 was not just a machine. It was a platform for complex operational strategies that demanded skill, coordination, and resilience from every crew member. These three angles, human, technological, and tactical, illustrate that the B-17 was more than a bomber. It was the culmination of effort, ingenuity, and strategy. Pilots and engineers, innovations and designs, formations and doctrine, all converged to produce a weapon that could redefine the U.S. approach to aerial warfare. The stage was set to explore the remaining angles: leadership decisions, enemy considerations, and the moral and industrial implications that shaped the B-17's rise to prominence. At the heart of the B-17's development was decisive leadership. General Henry Hap Arnold, Chief of the Army Air Corps, was the driving force behind America's strategic bombing vision. Arnold recognized early that future wars would be won not just on land or sea, but in the air. He championed the creation of a long-range bomber, pushing both the military bureaucracy and aircraft manufacturers to embrace innovation. Arnold faced skepticism from Congress, conservative military planners, and even some within the Air Corps. Critics questioned the feasibility of building a four-engine bomber capable of transoceanic missions. We must be realistic. One contemporary official warned, the technology is untested and the cost is extraordinary. Arnold's response was unyielding. He leveraged demonstrations, prototypes, and early test flights to prove that the B-17 was not a gamble, but a necessity. Within Boeing, leadership also mattered. Engineers and executives coordinated with Arnold and his staff, negotiating specifications, production timelines, and modifications. Edward Curtis, chief engineer, navigated the tension between innovation and practicality, ensuring that each design adjustment met military requirements without delaying production. The collaborative leadership between the military and industry became a blueprint for America's wartime mobilization, setting the stage for mass production and operational deployment. The B-17's development cannot be separated from the threat it was designed to counter. Across the Atlantic, the Luftwaffe dominated the European skies. German bombers and fighters had already devastated Poland, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France, demonstrating the lethality of coordinated air operations. High-speed Heinkel He-111s, Messerschmitt Bf-109s, and Ju-88s carried out precision strikes with devastating effect. U.S. military planners analyzed enemy tactics meticulously. They noted that European bombers relied on speed and tight formations, while fighters executed relentless interception attacks. Anti-aircraft artillery, radar-guided or otherwise, was capable of inflicting significant losses on unescorted planes. The B-17's defensive armament, high-altitude capability, and robust construction were direct responses to these threats. It was designed not to evade danger through speed alone, but to survive and strike back, a flying fortress capable of standing up to the best Europe had to offer. Enemy analysis also influenced doctrine. Intelligence reports shaped bombing routes, formation strategies, and mission planning. Pilots trained to anticipate fighter attacks, flak concentrations, and mechanical failures, internalizing both enemy tactics and the B-17's capabilities. Every wing of the flying fortress represented a tactical solution to the harshest lessons gleaned from observing the skies over Europe. The B-17 was as much an industrial achievement as a technological one. Factories in Seattle, Wichita, and Renton became hives of production. Every stage, from forging engines to assembling fuselage sections, demanded precision and discipline. Workers learned new techniques, adapted machinery for mass production, and often endured grueling schedules. By the time the first operational units rolled off assembly lines, the United States had not only built an aircraft, but also demonstrated the capacity of its industry to meet the demands of modern war. There was also a moral dimension. The B-17 symbolized hope and preparation. For the pilots and crews, it represented a fighting chance against an enemy that had already mastered the skies. For American society, still debating its role in a global conflict, it was a tangible sign that the nation was preparing to defend itself and allies abroad with courage, skill, and ingenuity. Each bomber carried not just bombs, but the aspirations of a country awakening to the realities of total war. The convergence of leadership, enemy analysis, and industrial effort reveals the B-17 as more than a machine. It was a response to necessity, a testament to human ingenuity under pressure, and a symbol of America's emerging role on the global stage. Its creation shaped the strategies, lives, and decisions that would define the air war in the years to. The first flight of the production-ready B-17 in 1941 was more than a test. It was a confrontation with uncertainty. On a crisp morning at Boeing Field, Seattle, engines thundered to life, vibrations coursing through the airframe. Test pilot Robert "Bob" Chilton gripped the controls, feeling the weight of every expectation pressing down. This was the culmination of years of design, engineering, and relentless trial and error. The B-17 lifted into the sky, its four engines roaring in unison. It climbed steadily, reaching altitudes that would have been perilous for earlier American bombers. Each system, from fuel pumps to gun turrets, was monitored with painstaking attention. Flight engineers called out readings, adjusting throttle and prop pitch. A single miscalculation could result in catastrophe, Yet the aircraft performed with a grace that exceeded even the most optimistic predictions. Earlier prototypes had faced failures. The infamous Model 299 crash at Wright Field in 1935 had cast doubt on Boeing's vision. The loss, caused by a locked control surface, was a stark reminder that innovation carried risk. But lessons had been absorbed. Engineers redesigned flight controls, strengthened structural components, and refined landing gear. By 1941, these improvements culminated in a bomber capable of withstanding both mechanical stress and operational hazards. The Army Air Corps sent its own pilots to test the aircraft. They executed high-altitude bombing runs, simulated long-distance missions, and tactical maneuvers designed to mimic combat conditions. Observers tracked speed, climb rate, payload capacity, and defensive effectiveness. Reports were meticulous. The B-17 could carry a full bomb load over 2,000 miles, cruise at altitudes above 25,000 feet, and survive attacks from multiple angles of enemy fire. It was a machine built to endure, designed to survive, and engineered to strike. Yet the human element remained critical. Crews encountered unforeseen challenges, sudden gusts that tested stability, engines strained during extended climbs, and freezing temperatures that affected instruments and crew performance. Pilots adapted, often improvising solutions mid-flight. Mechanics and engineers followed every test with relentless analysis, refining the bomber with each sortie. The interplay between human skill and mechanical innovation defined the B-17's development. By mid-1941, the Army Air Corps had completed its evaluations. General Arnold approved the first production contracts. The B-17 had passed the threshold from prototype to operational aircraft. Boeing accelerated production, retooling assembly lines, training additional workers, and coordinating logistics to meet the growing demand. Each plane rolling off the line represented a new chapter in America's readiness for war, a tangible expression of preparation, innovation, and perseverance. Across the Pacific Northwest, the first operational units prepared to receive their aircraft. Pilots trained in formation flying, defensive gunnery, and long-range navigation. Bombardiers honed their accuracy using Norden bomb sights, while crews rehearsed emergency procedures and survival drills. The training was rigorous, reflecting both the technological complexity of the B-17 and the harsh realities of aerial combat. Even as the B-17 entered service, the shadow of war loomed. In Europe, Luftwaffe raids intensified. Britain's cities suffered nightly bombings, and the effectiveness of long-range strategic bombing was being tested under fire. America had yet to join the conflict, but the Flying Fortress stood ready. Its engines capable of carrying crews into danger, its fuselage built to withstand the worst, and its promise poised to reshape strategic planning. The critical turning point was clear. The B-17 was no longer theoretical. It had survived testing, earned military approval, and begun to enter operational squadrons. The questions shifted from can it fly to can it dominate? The answer would soon be tested in missions that demanded not just endurance, but courage, precision, and resilience beyond anything America had attempted before. By late 1941, the first B-17s reached operational squadrons, signaling a new era for the Army Air Corps. Crews gathered at airfields across the United States, conducting training flights that pushed the aircraft to its limits. Long-range navigation exercises, formation drills, and simulated bombing runs became daily rituals. Every sortie tested not only the machine, but the men who had operated under fire. Across the Atlantic, Europe was engulfed in conflict. Britain's Royal Air Force fought to defend against relentless Luftwaffe attacks, demonstrating both the necessity and the danger of strategic bombing. American planners studied these operations carefully. Reports emphasized one critical lesson: unescorted bombers suffered devastating losses. The B-17's defensive firepower and formation tactics were designed to address this reality, allowing groups of flying fortresses to operate deep within enemy territory with a higher probability of survival. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, transformed the theoretical into the urgent. America was now at war, and the B-17 would play a pivotal role. Squadrons stationed in the Philippines, Hawaii, and eventually the European theater prepared for deployment. Missions were no longer training exercises. They were the opening steps in a global conflict. Pilots and crews flew reconnaissance and bombing sorties, testing routes over oceans, jungles, and enemy-held territories. Each flight revealed both the strengths and vulnerabilities of the aircraft, exceptional range and durability, yet still susceptible to mechanical failures and concentrated enemy fire. In Europe, Lend-Lease agreements allowed some B-17s to reach the United Kingdom, where they would operate alongside British forces. American crews familiarized themselves with European weather patterns, navigation challenges, and enemy defenses. The first combat missions highlighted the aircraft's potential. Over occupied France, B-17 formations conducted precision raids on factories, rail yards, and airfields. Defensive guns proved effective against fighter attacks, and the aircraft's structural integrity enabled crews to return even after sustaining damage. But victory came at a cost. Losses were inevitable, and each mission tested both the machines and the morale of their crews. Pilots like Robert Morgan, who would later fly the famous Memphis Belle, encountered intense flak and Luftwaffe interception. Crews learned that coordination, discipline, and adherence to formation tactics could mean the difference between life and death. The B-17's reputation as a flying fortress was earned in these skies, not on paper. Leadership decisions continued to shape outcomes. General Arnold and his staff monitored each deployment closely, adjusting strategies based on mission reports, losses, and intelligence about enemy capabilities. Production ramped up to replace losses, improve designs, and integrate lessons learned. Each adjustment reinforced the aircraft's strategic role, transforming it from a promising prototype into a cornerstone of U.S. aerial doctrine. By mid-1942, the B-17 had proven itself in the crucible of operational deployment. Its long-range capabilities, heavy defensive armament, and reliability under fire allowed American forces to strike deeper into enemy territory than ever before. The aircraft became central to the Army Air Force's strategy of daylight precision bombing, a concept that would define U.S. air operations for the remainder of the war. The decisive turning point was clear. The B-17 was no longer just a machine built in Seattle. It was a weapon shaping the trajectory of global conflict. From the first prototype flights to early combat missions. It had overcome skepticism, technical obstacles, and the realities of war to establish its place in history. The stage was now set to witness the aftermath, how the Flying Fortress influenced the U.S. war effort, changed industrial capacity, and left a lasting mark on the men who built and flew it. By 1942, the B-17 had transitioned from experimental aircraft to a symbol of American resolve in war. Operational squadrons in Europe and the Pacific faced the first real test, the unforgiving reality of combat. Daylight bombing raids, a tactic once considered too risky, became central to U.S. strategy. The Flying Fortress carried crews over hundreds of miles of hostile territory, often deep into enemy airspace, where anti-aircraft fire and fighter attacks awaited. The first missions were both revealing and sobering. Over France and later Germany, B-17 formations targeted factories, rail networks, and airfields. Pilots noted the aircraft's exceptional handling at high altitude, while bombardiers relied on Norden bomb sites to achieve remarkable accuracy given the era's limitations. Defensive armament proved effective against enemy fighters, particularly when formations maintained tight combat boxes. Yet the cost was high. Many missions returned with aircraft riddled by flak or damaged by attacks. Some crews did not return at all, a stark reminder of the lethal environment into which these planes were sent. These early experiences produced critical lessons. Pilots and crews learned the importance of coordination, discipline, and adherence to formation tactics. Flight engineers discovered stress points in the airframe and engines, prompting mid-production adjustments to improve durability. Bombing accuracy improved as crews refined techniques under real combat conditions, demonstrating that technology alone was insufficient without skilled operators. Strategically, the B-17 allowed the Army Air Forces to project power far beyond what had previously been possible. Targets deep in enemy territory, once thought unreachable, now lay within range. Factories producing aircraft, munitions, and military equipment faced disruption from repeated raids, forcing Germany to divert resources to air defense rather than frontline operations. Even as losses mounted, the psychological impact of American bombers striking the heart of Axis-controlled regions was significant. The B-17 was no longer a mere tool. It had become a symbol of determination and reach. Production challenges, however, persisted. Boeing, along with other manufacturers, had to scale up rapidly to replace losses while expanding the number of operational aircraft. Skilled labor shortages, supply chain delays, and the need for precision assembly meant that each bomber required meticulous effort. Yet this industrial push demonstrated America's capacity to transform civilian factories into wartime production powerhouses. Each plane rolling off assembly lines was both a tactical asset and a testament to national resolve. The human toll also shaped morale and doctrine. Crews returned with stories of endurance, ingenuity, and survival against formidable odds. The Flying Fortress's reputation grew not only because of its technological capabilities, but also due to the courage of the men who operated it. Letters from airmen described frozen hands, tense formation flying, and moments when the plane, riddled with flak, still brought them home. These personal accounts reinforce the aircraft's symbolic and practical importance in the war effort. The cumulative effect of these early operations was profound. By late 1942, the B-17 had demonstrated its strategic utility, informed American air doctrine, and highlighted both the promise and the peril of daylight precision bombing. Yet while the aircraft had proven itself in theory and practice, the war was far from over. The next stage would push production, tactics, and crews to new extremes, solidifying the B-17's role as the backbone of American strategic bombing campaigns. By 1943, the B-17 had evolved from a cautious experiment into the backbone of the United States strategic bombing campaign. Production had reached unprecedented levels. Boeing, along with Douglas and Lockheed Vega, ramped assembly lines, turning out dozens of aircraft each month. Every plane was a product of meticulous craftsmanship, coordinated logistics, and the ingenuity of a workforce working under immense pressure. Factories became crucibles of industrial innovation, proving that America could match and eventually surpass the Axis powers in mass-producing complex machinery. Operationally, B-17 squadrons conducted thousands of missions across Europe. Early lessons shaped the doctrine of daylight precision bombing. Formations flew in combat boxes. Overlapping fields of fire minimized vulnerability, and high-altitude navigation ensured both accuracy and survivability. Crews adapted to the harshest conditions. Freezing temperatures at 25,000 feet, oxygen shortages, and flak bursts that shredded fuselage panels. Losses were heavy, but gradually decreased as tactics, formation discipline, and experience improved. The aircraft's strategic impact was profound. Factories producing aircraft, tanks, and munitions were repeatedly targeted, forcing Germany to reallocate resources to air defense rather than frontline production. Rail networks, bridges, and industrial hubs were disrupted, slowing war production and creating logistical bottlenecks. Though the B-17 alone could not end the conflict, it became a decisive instrument in the broader campaign to weaken the Axis war machine. Morale, both at home and abroad, was influenced by the Flying Fortress. Americans saw the B-17 as a tangible symbol of strength, innovation, and resolve. Crews' bravery under fire captured the public imagination. Stories of damaged planes returning safely and missions carried out against overwhelming odds became emblematic of American determination. For Allied forces, the B-17 offered hope, a bomber capable of striking deep into enemy territory, forcing the Axis to fight on multiple fronts. The B-17 also reshaped military organization. Training programs expanded, emphasizing navigation, formation flying, and gunnery skills. Ground crews became essential partners in operational success, maintaining aircraft under extreme conditions and ensuring that missions could proceed despite mechanical strain. Leadership adapted as well, incorporating intelligence, reconnaissance, and lessons learned from each sortie to refine strategic planning. By 1944, the Flying Fortress had cemented its legacy. Tens of thousands of B-17s had been built, and squadrons were conducting complex raids over Germany, Italy, and occupied territories. Losses remained significant, but the aircraft's resilience and firepower allowed it to endure where earlier designs would have failed. It was no longer simply a bomber. It was a platform for strategy, a symbol of American industrial and human capacity, and a cornerstone of the Allies' path to victory. As the campaigns continued, the consequences became clear. The B-17 had changed the nature of air warfare. Its success validated the vision of leaders like General Arnold, the ingenuity of Boeing engineers, and the courage of countless airmen. But it also foreshadowed the immense human cost and technical challenges of total war. The story of the B-17's aftermath set the stage for reflection, a calm, philosophical assessment of what this machine represented for history, warfare, and humanity itself. The B-17 Flying Fortress was more than a machine. It was the embodiment of American ingenuity, determination, and industrial might. Born from urgency and skepticism, it became a symbol of resilience, carrying thousands of men into the skies above Europe and the Pacific, facing flak, fighters, and freezing altitudes with steadfast purpose. Each mission was a test of human courage and mechanical endurance, a partnership between crew and aircraft that shaped the trajectory of modern air warfare. Strategically, the B-17 transformed the concept of bombing. It made long-range, precision attacks possible, forcing enemies to divert resources and rethink defenses. Factories, bridges, and transportation networks could no longer operate in isolation. They became targets in a new kind of war, where distance was no longer protection, and the skies themselves became a battlefield. The lessons learned from these missions influenced aircraft design, tactics, and strategy for decades to come. Yet the Flying Fortress also reminds us of the cost of war. For every aircraft that returned, others were lost. For every target destroyed, lives were imperiled. The bravery of pilots, bombardiers, gunners, and ground crews turned the B-17 into a legend, but also exacted a profound human toll. Their sacrifice is inseparable from the history of the aircraft they flew and the nation they served. In the end, the B-17 stands as a testament to what is possible when innovation, courage, and purpose converge. It bridged the gap between a nation unprepared for global conflict and one capable of projecting power across continents. It left an indelible mark on aviation, military strategy, and the human imagination. And in the quiet moments, when a B-17's engines roared above, it carried not just bombs, but the hopes, fears, and determination of an America awakening to the realities of total war. The Flying Fortress became more than a weapon. It became history itself, a soaring monument to human ingenuity and the courage to face the unknown.